Hey guys, today this video will be about the rise of the British Empire. We're gonna start with its basic beginnings, and yeah, I guess we'll go into it. I really like that intro though. Took a while. Let's go. The entire history of Britain is just so crazy. A lot to do in the beginning is family lines, but I'll do my greatest to get into it. So based off trying to memorize it all, we have Queen Elizabeth I who dies without heir, so they would elect a Scottish king. Yeah, they allowed him in, and his name was James VII of Scotland and James I of Britain. At the time, I think called England. So they decided they might as well try and unite. But the thing was, they were not really fully united. This is 1604. But as much as they want to feel united, they never did. They were politically separate. Now, another split too was the religions. You see, Ireland was dominantly Catholic while England was dominantly Protestant. That was another thing that started the entire split. Because of this made a lot of assassination attempts and attempts of revolutions. It would all finally come to an end when there would be an English Civil War. But before we go into that, we'll have to explore something real quick. The colonies. Britain was always looking to see if they can expand themselves. The reason why was Britain wasn't as big, and they wanted to continue going forward and spreading themselves all around. While other reasons like, economics. They wanted to become really rich and powerful. They wanted to explore. They wanted to do things. They tried to conquer France before, which is an attempt for conquering Europe, but it failed. So they decided to see other places to see if they can grow and expand. Luckily for them, God made them the greatest empire on earth. I also want to just address this. Yeah, they did slavery. It was an awful thing. Though it was a while ago, it still was going on until 1833. It's an awful thing what the British did, but it's a good thing it was gone at that time. It was one of the first to abolish slavery, so good for Britain, but also bad for Britain for what they've been doing for almost 300 years. I believe they started 1600, somewhere around that, so 200 years. But still, shame on what they did before, but glad they changed. The king at the time, which was Charles I, would have major differences with Parliament, relatively new thing that was introduced. This massive split between them would lead to a civil war, and because of this civil war, it split them into these four groups. One was the Scots, one I believe was the Irish, and then we have the main two that fought, which is the Royalists and Parliamentarians. Another name for them were also called Roundheads, while Royalists were called Cavaliers. In the end, the Parliamentarians won because of the technology they had and the new strategies they came up with, and they would destroy the king for now. The king would be restored. 1645, the new king comes in, named Charles II. He would also marry Catherine of Braganza, where she would introduce, it's tea. The new king in 1685 was largely Catholic. His name was James II, so he would be replaced by another king named William III. This was known as the Glorious Revolution, but soon after, this would make Scotland very angry, seeing how they were a little bit more Catholic and liked the older king. Over time, things weren't going well for them. Scotland had a lot of failed colonies, and England was just not doing as good as it should have done. So they thought they really need to unite, or they might just get behind everybody. And so they would unite to create the United Kingdom of Great Britain, or also known as the Great British Empire. That is the start of it. In part 2, we're going to talk about how they did all their colonies and the 13 original colonies, and kind of a lot to do with the ideals that Britain had. Hello everybody, welcome to the newest video and part 2 of the rise of the British Empire. The whole story of it. So, we're now just going to talk about the next step in their direction. They recently, last time we talked, they reunified. They formed together with Scotland and England. They would create the British Empire, and they would also take Ireland with it. And due to this now like brotherhood, right? They would have a brotherhood, and they would all no longer just be English, Scottish. They would be now seeing themselves as British. This new sharing of brotherhood had made them extremely powerful, and they wanted to show the world that they were strong and that they could pull off anything. So what would happen is the colonization era. This would be around 1700, and they would find some of the first colonies right after Spain, Portugal, and France, and they would basically make their own colonies, the ones that we know perfectly, the 13 colonies. The 13 colonies would be established by the British, and it was going really well for them. Now, there was a lot of problems, like Jamestown, right? But eventually they would find ways where they would solve these problems, and they would be very smart, right? The other one is called Plymouth, one where it was more religion-based, and it would help establish something very, very major for years to come. So Britain now has major colonies, but they're nowhere near the French. The French have way more land. I'm talking like tripled. You know, the French make the British look like nothing. This is back when the French basically ruled the world. This is maybe like their height, right? Right, you know, maybe before Napoleon, but in terms of land, I would say this is probably some of their best era. And yeah, they would be more aggressive due to the fact that they could easily just take all the 13 colonies. And so Britain would be clever on how they did everything. The first thing they would do that would make them much stronger is commercial trading. They would make sure to trade everywhere and to get their hands everywhere, right? They would put their hands a lot in places, and they would be strategic about everything. 2 is the ships. They would build a Royal Navy, and they would continue shipbuilding. And due to them building so many ships, it would allow them to basically have a naval power. And the geography for Britain was perfect. Like, look at it. It's all like one giant island. You know, and it helped them enormously. Due to the fact that they became a naval power, they were able to outdo the French in the colonies. And the first war we would see is the War of Spanish Succession. Now, I won't go too much in detail through the whole war, but what I will say is that it was a fight on preventing France and Spain from becoming too powerful. I might make a video on this another time, but basically what was going on is Britain would win, and they would take a bit of territories. Now, it wasn't an enormous amount, but it did create a major change. And after this war, they would be the #1 naval power of all of Europe, which made them of the world, since Europe was still very powerful at the time. And well, yeah, Britain was succeeding and becoming a rising power to the rest of the world. The second war they would go in is the 7 Years' War. I'm much more familiar with this one. Basically, in the 7 Years' War, they would fight enormously, but the Britain would go in even more. So it was even a more major fight, which made it even worse because once they won, they were able to take even more land, and no one really had much of an excuse not to give it to them, right? Because they pulled in a lot more, which meant they gained more. So they would beat the French, they would gain enormous amounts of land, which included all of Canada, and well, because of this, it became so expensive to hold everything. Oh my, the war was so expensive that they needed to increase taxes. And well, that's kind of where we see America. Many people would start rebelling due to the enormous amounts of taxes given. Some of the amounts going a little farther than what they should have done. And well, because of this would lead to the American Revolution. The British were embarrassed due to the loss of it all, it was funny because the French sacrificed everything just so Britain wouldn't be able to win. They put so much in there that this actually started the whole French Revolution in the first place. And America didn't give a single penny to help out the French, even though the French did everything. They were so angry at the British that they just made really dumb decisions and weren't being rash. So yeah, America had the best deal ever, and the British would not, they would be denied the modern day American territories. Luckily for them, they still kept Canada, and Canada would stay with them. The only problem was Quebec, due to how it was very French speaking, but we'll go into that another time. So that was kind of the end of the colonies specifically in the middle and southern regions of the Americas for the British colonization, but they were able to secure Canada, and at the time still contained the Hudson Bay River and the company there. So yeah, things were going super well for the British. This was a growing power for them. Like, they were doing amazing, and no one could really stop them. Hello guys, welcome to part 3 of the Rise of Britain series and the story of it all. Last time we checked, they lost against America, but they gained Canada. Now, since they finished up Canada and the rest of the Americas that they could get, they started to expand in other areas. One of the interesting places was Australia, where they would send in all their prisoners to. That's why Australia is terrible today, because everyone came from prisons. But back to the real point, they started expanding everywhere. Starting with in 1757, they would have their first colonies in India, and they would slowly expand even more over time. Within around the 1780s, they would be able to almost fully conquer the entire Indian continent, or well, subcontinent, and they would progress even farther than that, taking the whole thing within the early 1800s, and this would be known as the British Raj. The next thing they would do, within like 1743, they would go in main big conflict with China, right? And they would win Hong Kong after a huge war there. It was called the Opium War. Now, they're going even farther and they're doing amazing, right? They have India, they have a piece of China. The next part, they also have Australia, but the next area they would go for is Africa. They're one of the early colonizers of Africa. They would take the southern tip. The reason being that the tip area there was geographically very important. Imagine you're at the southern ocean and you're just trying to cross through and you don't know where exactly to go because it's new. Well, you can kind of see that where to go if you're near the land areas and the beaches there. So it would allow people to go through the direction correctly and get to the destination much better than other routes. The other thing being that this would allow them access to Australia, India, and the rest of the islands around the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. So yeah, they're now growing even farther. They've done an amazing job. Now, we got to deal with a certain 5'7" man named Napoleon. He was conquering all of Europe and disrupting the balance of power. Sure, he was awesome, won all those battles, like he's just incredible to see, but he also was destroying the balance of power, and it made Britain really upset. Now, when it came to Navy, they would absolutely destroy them, but in other sense, like, in the just army-wise in the ground, they never really were able to win much of that. So yeah, they're winning them. They lost a lot of these battles, but they weren't outright destroyed, right? And it wasn't until around 1814 where they would finally take out Napoleon. And Britain, I'm pretty sure they were the ones that proposed him just to be fully gone into an island. He would, he would go back, Waterloo, where Britain kind of led the whole thing. And because of that, of the loss for Napoleon, they once again defeated France. And it wasn't looking good, because now Napoleon's in St. Helena and he's gone. But that's good for Britain, Britain now has weakened France enormously and has a better opportunity of gaining even more lands, especially since the French were a huge rival to the British. But now the French and the British became more close, they became closer allies, especially with how they had a parliament and a constitutional monarchy established. The French would also have revolutions and become a republic. So the two of them were much more liberal and free. While the other areas of Europe, like Central Europe and the East, was very hardcore, conservative at the time, which meant that they were very authoritarian and still believed in, strong monarchy, especially Russia. The more east you went, the more authoritarian it would usually be. So yeah, now they have their colonies set up and they're doing a tremendous job. And for a while they're just being able to have everything. Soon they would establish a new change and everything. At this time it was relatively new. It was 1801 when the UK was formed. They would be allowing more sovereignty and freedoms to many of the areas they owned, and it would create a new era in Britain, or now the UK, for such a long time. And they would come into other little battles and kind of just be there and there to keep a balance of power in the world. That's what they would do for a very long time. And for a while, it worked out perfectly. But there'd be one war that would change everything. Which changed after World War I. Hello guys, welcome to the newest video. This is episode 4 of the British series. Today's video will be about World War I and World War II. So, let's go over what just happened. They now conquered India, Australia, South Africa, Canada. They're everywhere, and they became a superpower of a nation. For a really long time, they were the #1 nation in the entire world. No one can compete with them. They would rise to become so powerful that they would rival even the US at the time. Unfortunately, they would have one war that would change everything. World War I. They were always kind of neutral and just chilling there. And they would also want to protect more neutral countries and make sure no nation became stronger than them. So yeah, they would kind of play the role just kind of there, maybe make good negotiations with other countries. World War I comes in, right? Starting with Archduke Franz Ferdinand getting shot. But soon after, Austria-Hungary would plan on invading Serbia, and they would not sign in the 10. Serbia would give them a 9 out of 10 of the demands from Austria-Hungary, but they would want all 10, and it was kind of on purpose that they wanted to start a war. If you read the 10 conditions, the 10th one was basically just have the investigation and just have troops in there. So yeah, Serbia wouldn't do it anyway. They knew it would be a loss. And Russia would get involved. They started a big problem with all the nations. Germany comes in, and then soon France joins in. Now, Britain decides to stay neutral, even though they're part of the Triple Entente and are friends with Russia and France. But once Belgium gets invaded, Belgian neutrality gets broken, this gets them involved. 1916. They would get all their soldiers in from everywhere around the nation. Canada, India, everyone. They would basically be able to get a giant colonial army ready. And they would come into with all their troops in. And this is one of the contributing reasons why World War I was in the favor of the Entente. If Britain never came in, I think that the war would have been over. France would have lost. It just would have been maybe a little longer not like the war would be longer, but France, being pushed would take a little while longer. So for now, it would be on both borders, just kind of mixed in there. And then eventually, they would fall. So yeah, World War I is over now. Now that they have won the war and have changed everything, right? The next thing, World War II. An angry German nation rises, with now Nazi Germany forming. Hitler leads his men. They now invade Austria without a single shot. They succeed, Czechoslovakia, they want it all. Now, Britain just went through a war, right? They don't want to do anything else. So they decide, just let them do whatever. Just don't go too far. Oh, you took Czechoslovakia. Don't go too far. Eventually, they would create a limit. But finally, Poland gets invaded. And this is the thing that sparks everything. Once Poland gets invaded, that starts World War II. We have an era called the Phony War, which happens for like a year and a half to 2 years. And then finally, France gets invaded and kind of dies out. How they lost, though, was they all came at this area, as you can see in the map, and as they were pushing, Germany would come in from behind and knock them out. Luckily, a lot of the British men were able to get away, along with maybe some other French ones. Unfortunately, the rest of the French army would be destroyed, and that's how Germany was able to conquer France so quickly. It's not because they sucked, but yeah, they kind of honestly sucked a bit. I might make a tier list ranking for World War II and stuff. But yeah, to be fair, France had a good army. They just fell for Germany's trap. Anyways, Britain now has to get through the biggest challenge, surviving World War II. Winston Churchill would lead them through probably one of the worst eras Britain's ever faced, where London was getting bombed, huge amount of destruction happening all over. Winston Churchill, he would lead them to a victory. He would not surrender. He would not stop. He would keep on fighting for the British. He would keep on coming through. He would keep on holding it. Operation Sea Lion happens, they were able to hold out well. No matter what, Germany couldn't conquer Britain. That was an impossible thing. Even I believe he admitted it. And so, Britain holds out well. But then, everything changes when the Soviet Union comes in. So Germany invades the Soviet Union, we all know what happens, and they lose. Britain was able to hold out well, and with their tricks, tricking Germany to thinking they would invade in this area, they would place all their troops there, and then they would do D-Day with America. And so, they would push and have the victory that Britain was waiting for. Germany would lose, Hitler shot himself, and yeah, it was over. The next era would happen, called the modern era, where the Cold War would decide what this new modern world would look like. Will it be communist or capitalist? The next video will be the decolonization and kind of the downfall of Britain, because I feel like World War II is the reason, Britain kind of declined. Maybe World War I was the starting point, but there's no turning back after World War II. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the final part of the British series. We have seen her rise, we've seen her struggles, and now we are gonna see her fall. Let's explore the final story of the British Empire, the fall. So, this is now the decline of the British Empire, the decolonization era. So what happens is, Britain's now weak after World War II. Huge amount of debt to America, huge amount of resources gone, just not doing well. Because of this huge disadvantage they have, and due to them becoming much more loose around the world, slowly more and more countries would try and break off. All this is happening, and this is just freaking out the British. They're losing everything, and they even fight against some of the African nations, but they can't do anything because the Soviet Union and the United States just eat up everything, and these nations just break off and join one of the sides. Now this is the rise of the United States, the Cold War, the formal power that Britain used to have. The first one to lead the British Empire, or the UK, or the British Commonwealth, the first one to gain independence in Africa was Ghana. Pretty soon more started leaving, and this would mark the downfall and destruction of what is, and it's just the fall of the British. They used to have the #1 currency. It got replaced by the US dollar, and it was just not looking good for them. They were declining fast. Soon, countries like India, Australia, Canada just fully broke off. They didn't, have anything to do with them anymore, other than sort of recognizing them as like the queen right? And more African countries also started breaking off. What didn't help is the Soviet Union. Now that the Soviet Union was so powerful, they were able to spread their influence everywhere. This would also affect African countries. Soon they were declaring independence against the British. Now why didn't they get their act together? They still were pretty strong, their economy was powerful, and they surely could recover within like a decade. The reason being, after World War II, they saw themselves as mad people. They didn't see themselves ever since World War I. It wasn't the same. So people kind of just gave up. It was way too costly. It just wasn't the things that they wanted to do anymore. They would slowly just give up, along with other countries that had colonies, like Portugal, Spain, and even France. This would be the sad downfall of all the colonization in Europe. I mean, it's lucky for all the African nations, but we're focusing on Britain right now. Britain would have their slow downfall. The saddest thing, I think, is probably the death of Queen Elizabeth II. Her reign came in 1952, and she did such wonderful things. Unfortunately, she died in 2022. This is a very tragic and sad moment to many people, and this kind of made even more people want to leave, as it showed Britain nothing but just melancholy. Right before that would be a moment called Brexit, which changed everything. This is before she died. Brexit was them leaving the European Union. We'll see what happens from there. But this teaches us something about power. How a country can gain so much and lose just as much within just 40 years. Clearly, we can see that there's no doubt that they made a change to this entire world. They changed everything. They had spread great ideas of democracy, great ideas of law, God, and truth. They had changed the world, I would argue maybe for the better, sometimes for the worse. But they have, without doubt, created some of the greatest changes of the entire world. It is crazy how powerful the British came. So this is the end. Hope you enjoyed this. Yeah, this is the story of the British Empire.